Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Good evening and welcome to Prairie Lights. I'm Kathleen Johnson with Prairie Lights, and tonight I am very pleased to present Marianne Maili, who will read from her novel, Lucy Go See. Maili?
Yeah, you did perfect.
I hate it when I don't ask those things ahead of time. Marianne Maili grew up in rural Iowa near Dubuque. For 25 years, she traveled extensively throughout the world while living and working as a model and actress in Italy, Japan, France, Spain, Hong Kong, Austria, and Switzerland. In addition to that work, she has earned numerous degrees. She has a BA from the University of Iowa, a Certificat de Langue Française from the University of Paris-Sorbonne, and an MA and PhD from the University of Barcelona, where she was a Spanish Ministry International Mobility Scholar. Her PhD was in the construction and representation of cultural identities. An American and French citizen, she speaks English, French, and Spanish, and translates from Catalan. Marianne Maili has taught at the University of Barcelona, the CIEE Barcelona Study Center, the Writing School at the Ateneu Barcelonès, and she was also an Erasmus Distinguished Foreign Visitor at the Josef Svoracki Literary Academy in Prague, Czech Republic. And she has been a visiting scholar at the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa. She's taught at the University of Dubuque and the University of Wisconsin-Platteville, where she was interim head of the French program. Lucy Go See was awarded a finalist position by the American Book Fest's 2018 Best Books Award in the Women's Issues category, and recently was awarded the Eric Hoffer Da Vinci Eye Award for Outstanding Cover Art.
Woo.
We are very glad to have her here tonight. Please welcome Marianne Maili.
Thank you very much. You did an amazing job with all those pronunciations there. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you to Jan Weissmiller, to Prairie Lights, to Kathleen Johnson, to Mary Taft, and the whole Prairie Lights team, and also to Jim Harris, who hired me here 35 years ago, and to Carol Cassier, who's behind the camera back there with PATV, who there's a wonderful documentary called The Quiet Rebel, which recently won the Best European Documentary. See it? That's Carol's. And all of you, thank you for giving me a precious hour of your life tonight. It's a really dreamy night for me. As I said, I worked here 35 years ago, and I dreamed about doing this, and I also was dreaming about traveling and having sort of glamorous, exciting life. And then while I was having that glamorous, exciting life for a while, while I was writing about it later, I was dreaming about my son being able to come here and be a student. And he's graduating on Saturday. And I'm here. I feel like I'm graduating tonight. So thank you. Many folks in Iowa helped me move this book out into the world, and I'm grateful to so many people that are here tonight and that are not here tonight. And a special hello to the friends that are far away that are going to watch this filmed. And I have a lot of things to say about this novel, a lot of conversation around it, but you're here for a reading. So what I'm going to do is read the prelude, as I call it, because it's a more musical piece of writing than going into the chapters, and then I will read chapter 1. And after, there'll be some time if you like to ask questions, or if you have a request, if you've read it already. I know some of you have, and you have a request to to hear any of it, let me know. The first chapter, it's a Bildungsroman. It's also a quest. Jim McPherson, who I wish could be here tonight, and maybe somehow he is, asked me years ago what kind of myth my story was. And I said, I don't know. And he said, tell me about your story. So I told him, and he said, that sounds like Pilgrim's Progress. He said, my story sounds like Pilgrim's Progress? Like 16th. And he said, yeah. So I bought a copy and I took it back to Barcelona with me. And I realized he was right, because it is a story about a spiritual quest, in a way, a man who's leaving a place where he feels out of place and searching for heaven, let's say. Everybody has a different idea of that, right? So that's where Lucy Pilgrim comes from, the name Pilgrim. It's also where the structure comes from a bit. And the manner of her setting out is the first part, which is an appropriation of Pilgrim's Progress, the manner of his setting out. And it's also, the chapter I'm going to read is in quest literature, what would be called the setup of the ordinary world, before the hero, heroine, or the character travels into the extraordinary world. I think I'm... So this is the prelude. Everybody can hear me all right? Okay. These are the things she knew. Joy was a house to be lived in, with laughter as its guardian. Sorrow and anger visited, but Lucy would not let them stay. It was a mobile home, her house of joy. Its walls were her skin. She knew she was different, that she was born with desires that no one else around her seemed to have. And because she was just one sapling in a massive forest of relatives, rooted and thriving where they were, it seemed the problem surely lay with her. And she became nervous, as what she knew did not fit with what she saw. Was she in the wrong place? She knew, too, that nature knew the way to be. She knew the solace of trees, the openness of pastures and meadows, the enthusiasm of brooks and streams, the beauty of growth in all stages, the triumph of flowering, the following decay, the warmth of the sun, the strength of the wind, the cleansing rain, the pristine nature of snow, the color of fall. She saw there was pain, and she saw love eased it. She knew she was pretty, and she knew she was smart, and she saw that almost everyone wanted her to think she was not that pretty or that smart. She wanted them to apologize for not having seen all that was in her. She wanted to prove to the world and herself that all she knew was true. She wanted to go and see what lay beyond the rolling green hills of the upper Mississippi Valley. And she wished she could take all those she loved with her, which she did, for she was made of them. Lucy wanted to sculpt her life in much the same way she shaped the earth after rain as a girl. For her life was to be play, and her work to be play. earnest, serious play. If there was a God, he was a benevolent one. She knew that, too. And the only thing she saw right in the church was the singing. She saw death left behind the shell of a body, that mobile home discarded. It was obvious the spirit fled it, though she didn't know where it went. Yet, she could feel her pioneering ancestors, both around and inside of her. She listened more to the voice inside than those hawking their wares out. She knew, too, that what most people called love was not, and that love was uneasy. And she knew that desire was something altogether different, too. She had a feeling that sex was much more important than anyone seemed to realize, much more sacred than anyone would like to believe, and even more powerful than anyone had already imagined. She sensed it was at the base of creation, not to be messed with without messing up the whole system. And she knew when her grandfather kneaded her breast as he hugged her, that something in the system was obviously very messed up. That was the prelude. After I wrote the whole novel, at a certain point I was asking one of the readers, trying to think where I start. She said, this is the way I see it starting. These are the things she knew. And I just turned around that, It's a great exercise if you ever want to try it, because it brings up that question, like, what the hell do I know? And I've given it to students as well, which is not their favorite, but it's an interesting one. So the novel also has, this is a black and white, but in the hardcover there's drawings in color. It's printed in color. Has some of my drawings in it. And so this is the first chapter of the first part, which is the manner of her setting out. The first inkling of a way out came via envelope, handed off by a departing spectator at the Twins Astro game in St. Paul. A breeze cut through the heat. In the shaded seats of the stands, it smelled like pop and cool cement. Lucy's two brothers and dad were in the dugout meeting the players. Her two sisters were back in Iowa. Viola Pilgrim looked over her daughter's shoulder. What's that? Lucy showed her mother the Miss Teenage America application. She had just unfolded. Viola wrinkled up her nose, then darted her eyes around. Who gave you that? Lucy lifted her chin toward a balding man exiting the stadium. Him. Viola glanced, already shaking her head in rapid disapproval. Throw it away. That's all you need, is to be getting yourself mixed up with characters like that. This first chapter really contains the whole novel. And Mother's always right. But Lucy was engrossed in the fine print at the bottom of the page. The guy had looked as normal as any other to her. She thought her mother was a suspicious woman who would do what she could to keep her captive, like a sort of Cinderella in a tower, only letting her out for chores or family activities. Yet she was surprised, and not, that someone considered her Miss Something or Other material. She believed she was good looking, but as scarcely anyone else mentioned it, "You clean up real nice, Lulu," was the biggest compliment doled out, and that by her dad. She had begun to doubt. Now here was proof of some kind of attractiveness. Though she had already read that she was unable to compete for the prize, which was just as well, she told herself, because there was no way anyone would get her in sequins twirling batons, a talent she associated with such competitions. Her brothers, Blaze and Ease, bounded up the stairs ahead of their dad, carrying freshly autographed baseballs like prized gems. Lucy raised her eyes, then slid the application toward her father's firm, round belly, saying, "Look." Tom Pilgrim glanced at the title. "You're not a teenager yet, are you, babe?" "I will be in November. Anyway, it's only for Minnesota residents." He waved it away and looked out over the empty ball diamond. "Then just forget about it. There's no sense in thinking about what you can't have or can't do." Lucy saw his point, though she was looking for some acknowledgement of the recognition of her beauty, or her appeal, whatever it was that had caught this man's eye. She watched her father's eyes for any arrow of sadness, always curious if he regretted giving up on professional baseball to raise a family. And if it was painful for him now to watch his younger brother on the field. All she ever saw was his joy and pride in his younger brother. And right then, a longing for the field and the play. She admired what she imagined as a lack of envy and a sacrifice of one desire for another, for a greater one, even though his choice was difficult for her to understand. Giving up professional baseball to live in a small city in Iowa and raise 5 children sounded boring to her. Yet she imagined she would not be without it, so she had to be grateful for it. She wished he had done both, and she could have had the exciting, glamorous life of being a daughter of a professional baseball player. She also liked the way home, family, and friends were more important to him. Lucy wanted an exciting life, though that was certain. How could she do it when her mother and father had not? Unable to throw it away, she rolled the application. Folded, then rolled the application. I get the words on the page. Before sliding it into the front pocket of her jean shorts like a bullet, like ammunition ready to aim at future naysayers, as if it were proof of some sort of power. Lying in the back of the station wagon, watching the puffy clouds fly by on the ride home, she wondered if what had inspired that man to consider her a contestant could be her ticket out of the cornfields. Could the way she looked alone be enough to take her places she wanted to go? For the time being, her life in Iowa was junior high in the city and home in the country. Lucy kept to herself mostly in both places because she felt misunderstood in both places. She was at once bold and shy, and her budding self-consciousness was gnawing at her self-esteem. She loved to spend afternoons wandering in the woods with the squirrels, sitting by the streams, molding the silt, or lying flat on her back on the hills, watching birds, butterflies, and clouds. Evenings, she walked across the yard to her grandparents' house to help Grandma Pilgrim bathe and prepare for bed. Lucy emptied, then cleaned her grandmother's bedpan, as she often had, looking at the color, taking in the smell, thinking about the cow pies in the pasture, feeling grateful that humans use toilets. When Marie Pilgrim said, "Honey, you should work in a nursing home," Lucy turned toward the tub where her grandmother was pouring warm water over her drooping, tired breasts and shook her head. She did not like to look at her grandmother's body very long, yet she did, long enough. She would wonder later in her life if seeing her grandma's naked, tired, arthritic body had been what had taught her early not to focus only on physical beauty. "I do this for you, Grandma," Lucy said as she helped her out of the bath and into the bed. This was the woman who taught Lucy to read when she was 4, who stuffed butterscotch drops and dollar bills in her hand when she brought her the daily paper from across the road, who told her the family history, whose eyes glistened with both joy and a sort of sadness when Lucy offered her bouquets of hand-picked violets. Lucy enjoyed the nightly ritual of carrying her a small plate of club crackers, a pitcher of iced water, and painkillers for her arthritis. After Marie swallowed them, she rocked back and forth on her bed. Lucy caressed her back. She wanted her grandmother to know what she really wanted to do, so she told her, "I'm going to see the world, Grandma. That is what I'm going to do." Marie smiled wistfully. "I'd just like to go somewhere." Lucy noticed her emphasis on the last word and wondered if her grandmother had had a happy life. "Ask your mother if she goes into town tomorrow, if I can go along, even if it's just to sit in the car." Lucy nodded. It struck her then that her grandma did not know how to drive. Lucy looked out the window to the pasture. "Grandma, did you ever want to see the world?" Grandma Pilgrim sighed, as if to say, "Oh, honey, if you only knew how much." And then spoke. "Lucy, I could get on a bus and ride and never come back." Lucy wondered what her grandma wanted to get away from, and what had kept her right there, just up the hill from where she started her life, all her life. Lucy had yet to see how difficult it would be, and was, for a woman to move in the world. "She looks so pretty, so at peace. She looks so good, Ernst." Some offered with condolences at Grandma Pilgrim's wake. Lucy, now 14, watched her grandfather stare at his wife's lifeless head on the coffin's ivory silk pillow. How he looked like a horse struggling with a bit, and how he winced. She wanted to scream, "What in the hell is the matter with you people? Pretty? Good? She's dead." Lucy was kneeling in front of her grandmother's body, trying to figure out if her lips were glued shut. Viola, who was standing behind her, put her hand on Lucy's shoulder and said, "Touch her if you want. Lucy was shocked by the cold hardness of the body, but didn't flinch. The touch only confirmed for her that her grandmother wasn't in there. She stood up and wandered through the funeral parlor, a Victorian mansion formerly owned by one of the city's pioneer industrialists. She poked her head into the den off the viewing room, where the closest family members gathered, and smiled as she said, "Isn't it funny that they laid dead bodies in what was once someone's living room?" Nobody laughed. Lucy sighed and wished yet again to be understood. Graveside, it became clear to her that her grandfather was in trouble. She had never seen emotion in him, and he was overcome. She watched Ernst palm one corner of the casket and not let go, and then was both horrified and awestruck by her father's ability to lift his father's hand so that his mother's body could be lowered into the ground. She gazed at her grandfather's face, bathed and dripping in tears. He did not attempt to brush them away. She cased his movements as he climbed down into the grave and walked around every corner of the casket, ensuring it was sealed and secured, as if he were tucking his wife in for a very long rest. Lucy froze, watching his grief. She stood with the taste of salt in her mouth, perspiring, then stared at her scarred, trembling knees, smiling a smidge when she noticed the reflection of the tall cedars and blue sky in the silver buckles on her red patent leather shoes. She liked to think her grandma made her look. Out of a sense of duty and a need to fill the hole left by Marie's passing, Lucy slipped into her grandparents' house at night like a cat. She sat on the floor in front of her grandfather's recliner as he watched the news. If he was downstairs, she lit on a stool in his workshop. Watching the way he could make any broken thing work, simply by taking it apart, studying it, and putting it back together, made her believe she could too. She would come to apply this approach to everything in her life. When Ernst was working in the garden or pasture, she waved and then took the opportunity to go inside alone and sit on her grandmother's bed and remember. She touched the pillow, polished the silver monogrammed hand mirror, or fingered the cut glass doorknob where her cane still hung, opened her closet, and smelled her clothes. She was glad that Ernst did not let her aunts take the... There we go. I'm being vain, I'm not picking up my glasses. She was but it's time. She was glad that Ernst did not let her aunts take the robes, house dresses, Sunday party, and card club dresses to Goodwill as they wanted to. Marie's death was the first hole made in Lucy's life. Touching what her grandma had touched eased the rip of death. Her grandmother's passing made her think about her own, and she felt shorn and did not want to die, to vanish, to never see all those she loved again? I mean, who does, right? Even though she went to Methodist Sunday service with Ernst and the Congregationalists with her mom's mom, Grandma Bigheart, in town on Saturday nights, her parents still insisted she attend the Catholic Mass. I don't think God really cares which church I go to, Lucy protested. Or even if I go, for that matter. All I do is sit here and think about everything else. Her father lifted his hands. Then it's good for that. Lucy saw his point, but she would have preferred an empty church in which to be alone with her supposed maker, rather than one crowded with hypocrites. She saw that most people who called themselves Christians did not act like Christ. As she grew, her grandfather often passed his large hand along her thigh and then slapped it, saying, "You've got legs just like your grandmother's. You're built just like her." This petrified Lucy. But she told herself that it was harmless, even though it didn't feel that way. She felt a certain quivering around her leg, like a thick plasma spreading and fixing itself into a transparent sort of shield. Not wanting to believe what she felt, the wrongness of it, she blinked it into impossibility, shook it off, willed numbness onto it. She sat or stood a little farther away when talking to Ernst, but always gave him a hug goodnight. We all need a hug goodnight, was the way she saw it. One evening, when she opened her arms and wrapped them around him, he slipped his hands between their bodies and kneaded her breast. He had strong hands, the size of dinner plates. It hurt her. She had no idea what to do, but she felt what he was doing was wrong. She teetered back and he let go. Her breast felt like it was scarred by a wrench, never to be the same again. That was the first time anyone other than her had touched her breast. With her glistening eyes down, she decided to pretend it hadn't happened. And she walked to the door as she normally did, and then walked home, stunned, her heart aching and breaking. She began a terrible gauging of degrees, thinking of horrible stories she had heard about girls' fathers coming to their bed at night and asking or forcing them to do unspeakable, unthinkable things. In comparing Ernst's abuse to those fathers, she worked at exonerating her grandfather. She was ignorant of the massive weight she was accepting to carry by her silence. He wanted to touch a breast, she guessed, and there had been hers in front of him. That at least seemed the best case scenario. And the only thing to do, it seemed to 14-year-old Lucy, was dust it off and find a way to carry on. The thought of telling her parents, because if she told anyone it would be them, only brought images of pain. The thought of her grandmother knowing about this stopped her breath. She could not imagine, shame scattered throughout her body. She could not imagine being able to speak the words rising in her. Grandpa squeezed my breast really hard and acted like it was normal and didn't even say he was sorry. Speaking that, telling anyone about this, she knew, would officially ruin her idyllic vision of their relationship. She loved the, Okay. She loved her grandfather the way she loved her whole family, like a task. Okay. She knew love was not a feeling, it was work. It was what one did, how one lived. And it was easier with some people than others. Being close to her grandfather made her feel special in a world where she often felt overlooked. She wanted one of those tender relationships between strong, wise, caring grandfather and cautious, that's interesting. It was supposed to be curious. And curious, smart, brave granddaughter who probably should have been more cautious. That she had read about and seen in movies, right? In her determination to make one, Lucy kept showing up for the job and darting, dashing, or ducking when need be. When she did hug him, she covered her breasts with one arm and wrapped the other one around him. She hoped he would get the hint. Mostly he did. Yet, a certain sickness lingered inside of her. Whenever she thought about what she was hiding in order to be close to him, that felt wrong too, and made her feel dirty somehow. But her successful shielding of herself made her feel less guilty. At 15 and 5 feet 9 inches tall, she was 6 inches taller than her petite and curvy mother, but still 4 inches shy of her broad father and grandfather. With money she made babysitting. She subscribed to the fashion magazines she'd seen while waiting for her mother in the beauty parlor. She was confused why they didn't appear in the mailbox until she found them hidden in the hall closet. She stormed up to her mother, waving them in the air. "Why are you hiding these?" Viola turned from the African violet she was watering in the kitchen windowsill. "That's a waste of money on useless crap. How many times do I already have to tell you to get your nose out of some book and do something?" Lucy, who knew something, meant either setting the table for 7, peeling and chopping vegetables, vacuuming, dusting, scrubbing, cleaning toilets, mirrors, shining silver, or ironing, went livid. "I'll mow the lawn, I'll shovel snow, I'll walk the garbage across the road. Let them come inside and do what I do." She was talking about her brothers, of course. But she may as well have been talking to the apple trees in the backyard for all the response she received. She let the screen door slam behind her as she walked out on her mother. Leafing through the magazines down in the pasture, Lucy saw modeling as a fabulous ticket out. What enticed her, this was the 80s, okay, was how happy, independent, and how happy, independent, and cosmopolitan the young women looked. That and the fast piles of cash she heard they made. She too wanted to stand in the middle of busy sidewalks in Tokyo, take Japanese baths, walk with elephants in Kenya, all while wearing fabulous clothes and getting paid for it. She looked up at the house, seething at her mother for trying to keep her from all she wanted, then marched back up the hill and slipped inside, taking care that the screen door did not slam notice of her return. Upstairs in the kids' bathroom, she stood in front of the mirror, comparing the magazine models' faces and bodies with hers. She saw no reason why she could not be among them. She thought of the Miss application she still had in her drawer. Her older sister, Ruby, looked in, then rolled her eyes. Don't you have anything better to do than stand around looking at yourself in the mirror? Lucy shrugged. Not at this moment, no. After Lucy saw a feature with Candace, a tall and very pretty girl from New York, who had just transferred to her high school in the fashion section of the newspaper. She waited until Candace was alone in front of her locker and then handed her the paper asking, "How did you do that?" "I'm taking modeling classes, and the woman who teaches arranged the job." Lucy looked the woman up in the phone book that afternoon. Viola was on her way out the door to go to the grocery store and was surprised by Lucy's offer to go along. Afterward, as they were leaving the parking lot, Lucy pointed to a building nearby. "Would you stop there for a minute? I'd like to get some information about a school." "What kind of school?" Lucy braced herself. She knew her mother would disapprove. "It's about self-improvement and beauty, and they give modeling classes." Viola glared. "Would you just forget about all that phony bullshit?" "Mom, please, I just want to talk with them. By myself. It'll only take a minute." Viola parked. "I'm not waiting here forever." Lucy sprung from the car. The front walls and doors of the agency were glass. A well-dressed woman talking on the phone behind a desk motioned for Lucy to come in, then pointed to the brochures. As Lucy waited, the door swung open again. And the most un-Iowan woman she had ever seen, with cropped red hair and flawless skin, sashayed in with a briefcase, knocking her knuckles on her left breast, saying, "These things are hilarious." She looked at Lucy, who was wondering where she could get a set of those, and answered the question in Lucy's eyes. I'm breastfeeding, they're breast cups." The woman circled Lucy then, smiling and nodding, not missing a beat. "You must be here for the modeling course." Lucy, standing there looking down at her jeans, button-down shirt, yellow rain slicker, and plastic boots, didn't know how much these women knew about fashion and modeling, but she could see they looked more sophisticated than she did. She glanced at the clock, then moved toward the door, waving the brochures in her hand. "I have all the information here. Excuse me, but I really have to go. My mom is waiting." The woman's eyes widened. "She didn't come with you?" Lucy wanted to tell the woman it was best her mom had not. Popped in to tell them what bullshit their business was, but decided to just smile and perhaps leave that for another time. Viola was no longer in the parking lot. Lucy didn't care. She was glad to have gotten where she wanted to go. As she contemplated calling her father, Viola charged in, the white Toyota Corolla splashing through puddles. Her mother stared straight ahead as Lucy slunk into the car, shut the door, and heard for the umpteenth time, "Don't you think I have anything better to do than chauffeur you around?" "Why don't you let me drive by myself then?" Lucy knew her mom would not answer that. She watched the headlights of the approaching cars blur and refract through the rain, and waited until they were further down the road to say, "I would like to take this modeling course." There was a moment's silence. Time? Okay. Yeah. I don't know. Taking my. Just finish that section? Okay. Where am I? There was a moment's silence as if Viola was considering it. Then Lucy watched the veto happen in her mother's brain. "I don't know why you need to go to school for such a thing. With all the brains you're supposed to have, why don't you use them?" "Supposed?" Lucy asked. I think that's a nice place to stop. Thank you. No, I know, I was just going slowly.
We have time for questions,
Sure.
because I know people will have.
I was
them,
trying
and,
to avoid those.
Oh, I don't think we should let her get away with that. Okay, we have a question right here.
Thank you for your reading this evening.
You're welcome.
And I was wondering, how much of Lucy's insights and desires are reflected in your own? How much is autobiographical? I realize it's not an autobiography, but your experiences, how do they influence Lucy?
A lot. A lot. I mean, I put it in third person to get distance, and I call it fiction to give myself more freedom. But then it's a true novel, if it can be called that, more than a factual novel. Moving things around to fit the story that, I don't always think that where conversations happened are as important as that they happened, for example.
The French call it autofiction, don't they?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit.
You're not going to
tell
talk
us a
about the
little
French,
bit
are you,
about-
David?
Having seen an earlier version of this, I was
Mhm.
hugely impressed by where you started and how different it was from what I saw
Yeah.
some years ago.
Okay.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about how you reorganized yourself for that?
I can try. I mean, it's not a short story. It's not a short answer. I think you read it when it was in the first person the first time. I'm not sure. I wrote different things over time. And then when I was doing my PhD at the University of Barcelona, I had a visiting professor from Australia say to me, if you were in Australia, I would have you do a composite dissertation. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, it's 3/4 critical creative work, and then it's 1/4 critical exegesis. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, he said, what I would have you do is write a novel, and then the critical exegesis would be you choose some themes from the novel, which I chose I chose eros, wound, and voice, these 3 things. And then you write, you use other scholars, and you use the novel, and you write a scholarly piece. So I ended up putting together some things I'd written in the past and adding some new things, and then writing this exegesis. And when I would work on that, that would change the way I would look at the novel back and forth. And those decisions I made, as I already told you, about third person, because it was first person, third person, first person, third person. It's been a very long process with this, so much longer than the second one. But it was, and part of the narration for me, I'm trying to think, when I was working on the second novel, and I was trying to write in the present, and I ran into Hugh, who said, but the present's always changing, you know? And so in many ways, I am the narrator of this novel, as well as the writer of this novel, but I would say the narrator is a more mature Lucy who keeps maturing, and a novel isn't written in a day. So that kind of answer.
Right, and when you talk about the second novel, you mean the one that comes after this?
Yeah, Lucy Pilgrim,
Okay.
Come Home.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Right. Well, there are a couple other really strong themes. Is this partially or part of what was part of your PhD?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Mhm. I've revised it again since then, but in
Yes,
strong part.
Right.
Yeah.
Because some other themes kind of come through too. I wonder what other ones you added. Like, there's a lot about agency and a lot about.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And I talk about that in the theme of, in Eros, the sexual agency, it's not an easy thing to talk about quickly. But I find it a hard, excuse me? Somebody help me? I mean, there's some people here who have read it and know this whole process. Yeah.
No, composite might be hashtag me too.
Yeah, a hashtag me too, exactly, because it's, when I first wrote it, I thought it was a different story. And it wasn't until I was working on it that I saw that at the heart of the story was the relationship with Lucy and her grandfather, which Hélène Cixous, who is a French writer and scholar and poet, writes about how all literature springs from a wound. And I started to see that, in fact, the novel traced that wound, like how Lucy's relationships were affected by that. I'm heading for a tangent here, and there's a lot. I have a very hard time condensing this novel. I think Mary, who's here, who said once, there's a lot in there. And the sexual agency, I mean, at the very beginning, let's see, it's such, part of the reason there's like nothing on the back, it's like a package, there's not an author photograph, there's a drawing, a self-portrait, is because it's a very intimate story. And originally I wrote it, I wanted to tell the story of what happened to me personally, I don't even know, can I say this here? You don't have to, I know.
No, we don't have any guidelines. It's all what you feel.
Well, I had an experience in my life where once I started living the way I really wanted to live, if you want, I started to be struck by random orgasms, okay? Just like walking down the street, nothing no one else was doing, just, whoa, okay, this is interesting, this is great. And I thought the story was about that. Okay, that's what was the genesis of the story in many ways. I got to tell this story, and and then because I like research, and I didn't get to that part in the chapter, but after what happens with Lucy with her grandfather, and then she starts hearing people talking about sex in high school, and she sets about, looking that research mind that I have, researching sex, let's say, okay, and trying to learn more about it. And so that's what I did with that. That was kind of the line. And at a certain moment, I realized it's more than that.
Right.
I don't know if that's...
And sort of along a parallel, you have Lucy describing love as being something she can do as work.
Right.
And similarly, the sexual nature thing goes from being more rote or work to more spiritual.
Yeah.
River.
So talk about
floating.
Bildungsroman.
Talk about what?
Bildungsroman.
Bildungsroman.
Yeah.
Okay, like a coming of age. Because I also thought it was a coming of age of Lucy. And when I got to when I was writing the section of voice for the critical exegesis, I realized as I was looking at this, what I read to you, that, Lucy's voice was there from the start. So it wasn't really a coming to voice. But what was not there was the voice of the wound. that was what was silent through the whole story. And that was very interesting to me because it's a wound that, I don't know if any of you have ever read Carol Gilligan, but she talks about how, and she's part of that critical exegesis, how, in a heterosexual relationship, in a patriarchy, it can't work because if you place one gender above the other, it's not a democracy and love is not possible, okay? And voices are not there. It's
Not heard.
not heard. Yeah, thank you. And will you repeat what you asked me? Because I've lost it again. Because there's so much,
I would like to hear you share about how the University of Barcelona affirmed Lucy Go See as an academic dissertation.
Yeah, so after this Australian professor told me that, like, I would have you do this dissertation, I went to my supervisor and I told her, and she said, wow, that would be groundbreaking because we've never... Thank you. Thank you. Because in England, there is a creative writing program in England, but on mainland Europe, creative writing has not been part of their academy. Okay, it's something that they consider is done in cafes or in vocational schools, but not in the university. And so this kind of dissertation had never been done at the University of Barcelona and had never been done anywhere in continental Europe. And that is to say, creative work had never been accepted. So that was very exciting for me, being an Iowa alum, to be part of that. And then when my supervisor said, but if you're going to do this, you're going to have to spend some time in the States. And I said, oh. She said, somewhere where you can do some research. And that's when I contacted Christopher Merrill, and he offered that I could be a visiting scholar here at the International Writing Program, because part of my dissertation was about the history of creative writing. So, and Barcelona was also, and when you read the novel, or if Carol and I recently recorded the audio of the novel, which will soon be ready in audiobook, Barcelona was also a very hot spot for Lucy creatively in her life. But it's a big honor for me, and it took some time, and there's a lot of stories contained in it, because there were people who tried to stop it, and there were people who really supported me. And I was awarded the first PhD that contained creative work on continental Europe. Thank you.
Which parts of the book, not to tell the plot, because
Yeah.
I don't want to ruin it for anyone, but beginning, middle, end, were in your dissertation?
All of it.
All of it, right.
It's just been revised in
Right.
streamlining, I would say. Or also, there was a point where I like to cut. Okay? I write long and then I like to cut. And also the same supervisor from Australia said to me, Marianne, you have to remember that not everybody thinks like you do, knows what you do, because I always feel like if I just leave what's there on the page, people will get it, And so part of what's here that wasn't in that was maybe more insight.
Yeah.
Though when I worked with Carol on the audiobook, she had to stop me, literally almost grab my hand from revising as I was reading the audiobook again. Saying, but wait, there's me, anyway, I don't know that.
What was the easiest, most joyful part of this book for you to write?
Writing about what I love about Iowa. Yeah. The land. Like the beginning, I wanted to maybe read chapter 15, but there's only 16 chapters because that also happens in Iowa. The novel opens and ends in Iowa. And it's about summer in Iowa, and there's a lot of, and that's one of the things David noticed when he read it the first time, the writing about Iowa. I have a real attachment to the land here. Mm-hmm. And some of the traveling and fun.
we have time for maybe one, two more questions. Does anyone have a question?
You mentioned where Pilgrim came from. Was
Yeah.
there a reason you chose Lucy as the first name?
I can't remember the first day I said Lucy. You know, it's got to be Lucy, but I liked Lucy for light. There was a while it was going to be Lucy Lucent, even. And one of the people on the dissertation committee said that the novel is a light shone on patriarchy. I also liked it because it's the first human skeleton found, right? The women. And I liked it for Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. I like Lucille Ball. And I like shortening it to Lulu. My dad used to say, "What a Lulu." So, light and travel.
Well, I'd just like to say that what I read earlier was in the first person, and it began with you right after college, and you were in Tokyo before almost anything else happened. I mean, not quite that, but this whole edition of the girl and the grandfather as almost a teenager, early teenager, and in the third person really puts a different spin on the whole thing, and it's a wonderful addition, I think.
Thank you very much. It's that's part of, you know, that comes from Jim McPherson in the way that structure of realizing I had to create the ordinary world, you know, where she was before she set out. And that's also because I learned what was there with the grandfather was in there before, but it was different because I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that comes back again later. And that was the part that was in there, but the first part wasn't in there. And for whatever that's worth, I have so much I could tell you. I don't know if you care, but anyway. And I don't mean that in a mean way.
One of the things that's so admirable about the character of Lucy is her honesty and her insistence on standing up for herself. And I just wondered if the process of writing this book has given you any sort of self-affirmation, or if it's given you any of that strength back.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
how that's going to inform your next book
Well,
that you're working on already.
yeah. One of the most beautiful things in the writing it all down, I mean, it started, Lisa Schlesinger, if any of you know her, I did a summer workshop with her here, and I left with an outline. And it's a nice story. I'm just not going to tell it right now, but and I went back to Spain and I wrote the whole thing down. It took me about 1.5 years to write it all down. And one of the best things to come out of it was to look at myself as a character, to look at myself as a young woman, and I have a tendency to be hard on myself and to develop a compassion for this character and do other things with it. But yes, the more I was able to, will you repeat that, just some of that, how I changed? No.
If some of the characteristics that are in Lucy, such as her insistence on being honest and straightforward and always on standing up for herself,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways that women typically haven't been trained to do,
Right.
and aren't typically done. If that's given you any strength back, you put it in the book, and has it given you that strength back, and how, and whether that'll help you in your next book?
Yeah, it gave me strength back. Like I said, I played with it, but it also gave me a vision, in a sense, of a part of my life, and it gave me a vision of those places where I did stand up for myself, and being able to see that more clearly, as well as to see the places where I thought I was, but I wasn't, and to take one's life, if any of you do it, writing or with diaries, whatever, to take one's life and to look at it, the beauty of being able to revise your past is a wonderful thing. And I also, so the second one, which is called Lucy Come Home, Lucy Pilgrim Come Home is the way it will be titled, because Lucy Come Home is already a title, I found out. And is written in the first person. And it's even, it's kind of like Moi je suis Lucy. I don't know, like Lucy claiming the story, and Lucy telling the story of what it was like, you know, to come back 25 years later. And I mean, with every revision, so with this one, I came to Iowa City last August with a 1,000-page draft, first draft. And about 2 weeks ago, I have now like a 200-page draft, a little over, you know. I go in words, so 435,000 words became 81,200 words. And to go over all of that, and it's so I wrote at a time before computers, so I still marvel at the fact that I can like put a cursor here and put a cursor there and just like erase. So much, because it's a question, and this goes with the standing up for, this goes with the like, oh, that is so unimportant. It's, I guess, the best sentence, and my brother-in-law recently said, that's really, I said, it's amazing how much does not need to be said.
Thank you for narrowing down some of it for us. And thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
We've been happy to talk with you and find copies. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Kathleen.